So the core geography and why Sri Lanka technically needs pure gold for whoever controls the lane. China imports crazy amount of oil from the Middle East. Think tankers from Saudi and Iran, etc. And almost all of it. So yeah, around 80% of the China's crude oil imports right now, plus a massive slice of overall trades. Not rice though, that's a tiny fraction. Has to squeeze through the narrow Strait of Malacca between Malaysia and Indonesia before heading up to China. So Sri Lanka kind of sits like a giant unsinkable aircraft carrier right on that route. So ship coming from the west pass right by its southern coast. So Hambantota Port, built with Chinese drones technically, is perfectly placed to watch, refuel, or theoretically mess with that traffic. That's why your chicken on the head jokes land so hard. It's the China Malacca Dilemma in real life. So in a crisis, say India-China border clash or a bigger war, something like that, which is inevitable to be happen in next 5 to 10 years, whoever has eyes or ships there could threaten to slow down or choke the Beijing's lifeblood. And China knows this. It's why they have poured billions into Sri Lanka under the Belt and Road initiatives. And India knows it too. That means the proximity means New Delhi sees any foreign base there as a dagger pointed at its own backyard. So what actually went down in 2018 and 2019? China in late 2017, effectively 2018, Sri Lanka leased the Hambantota port plus 15,000 acres to a Chinese company for 99 years after debt piled up. So it was framed technically as commercial, but everyone saw the strategic angle, dual use potential for Chinese Navy logistics. So US Vice President then was Mike Pence even called it out publicly as a future military base for China. And Sri Lanka swore up and down it wouldn't be militarized, but the optics yelled and screamed that it is the string of pearls. So China's chain of port footholds from Pakistan to Sri Lanka to Myanmar. And then there was supposed to be a reply from India, and around mid-2018, Sri Lanka was desperate to ease the Chinese debt pressure and offered India a shot at the nearby Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, which is the world's emptiest airport to what I have heard. So which is built by China right next to the Hambantota. So talks were on for the India to take the 70% stake or long-term lease, around $300 million deal to operate it. Basically, they were trying to buying out some debt or and getting operational control of the same. So it was never called a military launch point or a full base, but an airport that close to the port could absolutely have dual use of the whole structure of what China was using it. That means the surveillance, the logistics, the quick air access. These are the important points when something like this happens or something like war situations comes into the play. And the negotiations then dragged, talks stalled by late 2018, and it never materialized into Indian control. So there was no formal treaty for military access got signed. What India did push was economic and a quite influence in that area, radars along the coast for maritime awareness, development projects, and reminding Colombo that India is a bigger neighbor, big neighbor who can't be ignored as to their understanding. So the idea was very simple, that there was no 2019 military crisis where India suddenly got to a launch point access either. So 2019 had Sri Lanka's biggest political drama. That means the constitutional crisis with the president firing the prime minister. So and there were Easter bombings as well, so where India helped with the intel and relief, but nothing about handing over the bases. But the real shift came very later, the deeper defense ties, joint exercises, and by 2025 a proper defense MOU was signed, focused on the maritime security training and making sure Sri Lanka's soil is not used against India. But back in 2018 and 19, it was more about India trying to balance the China's footprint without a full base of its own. So Colombo plays both sides masterfully. Technically, they can't piss off India because that is the closest neighbor and the shared history, the Tamil sensitivities from the Civil War era. But they need Chinese cash as well, so they give the assurance to India that there will be no use of military while taking the Belt and Road Initiative money from the China. And it is not India owns the launch point. It is the influence warfare. Technically, India has the proximity advantage. China has the money. So this is about sea lane controlling potential future conflict. So India's neighborhood first and a SAGAR policy is exactly what about preventing this whole encirclement. If China ever militarizes the Hambantota, it shortens their supply lines and complicates any Indian naval blockade attempt near the Malacca Strait. So India counters it technically with its own island footholds in Agalega, etc. So the Quad partnership and economic leverage in Sri Lanka, the point about disrupting the house traffic all the way across, it's not just one port, it is the whole flow from the Middle East, Malacca and the China. So right now, it's more China holding the strategic card in Sri Lanka than India, but India's quite deals like radar, sport, stakes elsewhere, defense pacts. I mean, they can monitor and respond fast in those situations. So in a real crisis, that proximity plus India's navy could turn the tables on. The gravity is huge. They can disrupt those lanes, and China's economy stutters. Technically, when these things happen, the fuel shortages, the factory shutdowns, you name it. For India, it is existential neighborhood security. So Sri Lanka is the pivot for this whole Indian Ocean game, and 2018 and 2019 was peak tension in the India-China-Sri Lanka triangle, and it was not a clean India gets a military launch point win, but it was the start of India's serious counterpush to keep the China's pulse from tightening too close. The nuance is that no one gets a permanent base easily. Sovereignty matters, but influence, access, denials are the real weapons. So this is like a chess match. It's still going on. We need to watch the defense ties and portals. So let's see. Let's see what happens technically with such aspect. But also I feel that it is very, very important for India to realize that there are a lot of instances that they can make it a plausible deal under the SAGAR policy, and the SAGAR policy is one of those initiatives the security and growth for all, which is the most important and most trustable policy that has come to India over a period of time. So when it started, PM Narendra Modi dropped it on 12 March 2015 in Mauritius while handing over an Indian-built offshore petro vessel to them. And he was speaking at the Indian Ocean Rim Association (IOR) meet, and boom, India's new doctrine for the IOR was born. And this was not random; it came to a time when China's Belt and Road Initiative was loading the ports across the ocean. So think Hambantota is in Sri Lanka, Gwadar in Pakistan, all that string pulse stuff we talked about. India saw its lifeline, 90% of trade by sea, massive energy imports, island territories getting squeezed. So Sagar was the smart counter. It was not the confrontation, but a kind of a cooperative dominance that India was trying to build there. So rooted in the very ancient Indian philosophy-like structure, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family, which is to have an inclusive growth. There is no zero-sum games. So it is not a single treaty or a thick white paper. It is a vision, framework, or approach, flexible as hell. Prime Minister then called it India's creed for the IOR, and it later linked up with the Act East policy and the bigger Indo-Pacific game. And by 2025, it evolved into a Mahasagar, which is mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth across region. So same, the structure and this DNA is same, but it is zoomed out to global south and beyond. So there are 5, core pillars about it. The security first, keep India's mainland, island, Andamans and Lakshadweep, and the whole IOR safe, secure and stable. There is no foreign bases messing up with our sea lanes. Competition on steroids are to be done according to India, because there is a deepened economic plus security ties with maritime neighbors, especially island nations like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, building their own capacity, radars, training ships. So they're not forced to lean only on China. There is a collective action that it means to work together on disasters, piracy, illegal fishing. India was acted as the first responder and net security provided for all these nations. And there's a blue sustainable growth structure as well. There is blue economy, fishing, shipping, and renewables. These infrastructure straight that benefits everyone. Literal leadership, the people living around the ocean should lead its stability, not outsiders should come in. Transparency should be there. Rules-based order. These are the good things that has come into play. But the nuance over here is that Sagar is defensive, offensive both. It counters China's string of pearls by making neighbors prefer India as partner, cheaper, closer, and there is no sovereignty collapse that India is trying to build on themselves, which is our neighbors do not realize it because they need cash from China, but it is not an anti-China on paper. Modi always said that it is inclusive. So some neighbors still flip. Maldives had anti-India movements. Budget limits mean India can't match the China's wallet every time, and it is more vision than a rigid plan execution depends upon politics. So the gravity is huge. The IOR carries 80% of China's oil, half of the world's container traffic. You disrupt it, war blockade and economic tank for India. It is existential. Our islands, trade and energy security, Sagar position as the regional stabilizer, not just a reactor to China, which in a crisis India's Navy plus MDA plus island footholds is equal to a real leverage that India is trying to build on. And by 2025-26, Sagar takes it global, trying to include the Quad in the global South summits. So bottom line, it is Sagar is not about just the flashy headlines. It is quite patient power positions that turned India's backyard into a sphere of influence. And it explains why Sri Lanka, and those 2018 and 2019 moves mattered so much to us. It is still evolving, but a decade in India's the go-to first responder and security partner for a ton of IOR nations are there. So yeah, so these are the things that would be interesting to see in next 5 to 10 years.